right, who's still hungry in here? Oh, a lot of hungry people. All right, well, fortunately, I've got with me a breakfast sandwich here. Pretty simple breakfast sandwich. I know it looks good, doesn't it? Cheese, sausage, and eggs. Anybody want to eat this? Any takers? All right. Well, you, sir, are going to be the lucky recipient of this breakfast sandwich. I'll get it to you after. I've just got to do one thing first, so bear with me, OK? All right, now you're probably asking yourself why the heck I just dumped an entire gallon of water into a trash can. Why would I go and waste all that water? Well, to produce just the single egg in our breakfast sandwich here, I'd have to not dump out just that 1 gallon of water, but all 53 of these gallons of water. That's how much water it takes to produce just one single egg. Sausage, that's another 500 gallons of water, and cheese, that's another 50 gallons of water. That's what it takes to produce protein from animals. So in the 15 years that I've been researching food systems and advocating for a better one, I've come to realize that the number one most wasteful aspect of our food supply today, it comes from the fact that we just use animals as a total middleman. Now, here's what I mean. First, we grow crops, but we don't feed those crops to humans. We feed them first to animals to fatten them up. We raise the animals, we transport them to slaughter, and the rest is history. So yeah, animals are just the middleman between the crops we grow to feed them and the protein they produce to feed us. The problem is, it's super inefficient. Even in the best case scenario, a farm animal only converts like 11% of what's called feed energy into human food. That means that, calorically speaking, 89% of what we feed an animal, we don't get out as food. Nearly all these animals in our food supply chain today, they're chickens. We're so knee-deep in chickens today that 130,000 of these animals are slaughtered every single minute. Imagine that. 130,000 animals every 60 seconds, 24/7, 365. And because it's so inefficient to funnel crops through animals to get to protein, we lose loads of resources in the process, like all that water. All told, the meat, dairy, and egg industries are so wasteful, they're so inefficient, that they now cause more greenhouse gas emissions than every car, truck, plane, ship, and train in the world combined. But the problems aren't just global, they're local too. I met a woman named Lisa recently who lives on the eastern shore of Maryland on land that's been part of her family for like 4 generations. Totally normal neighborhood in most ways. You know, toys in the front yard, basketball hoops in the driveway, split-level homes. But Lisa and her husband Joe, they're being pushed off their land. They're probably going to have to sell their house soon. They're not being pushed off by crime or drugs or high-rise condos, but by chickens. See, I visited them last year, and I was really moved to see how just kind of peppered throughout this normal suburban neighborhood now are these giant chicken warehouses. I'm talking 10,000 birds per house, 20,000 birds. You know, I saw the hordes of flies. I smelled the stench in the air. I saw the buzzards flying overhead, ready to pick off all the dead chickens littering the side of their road throughout their neighborhood. You know, I had to see all that, but Lisa and Joe and their neighbors and countless people all across the country dealing with this, they have to live with it day after day, every day, right in their backyard. So we have to ask ourselves, does this still make sense? Sure, to get meat, to get protein, to get breakfast sandwiches, we've had to use animals as a middleman for thousands of years. But do we still have to? You know, if breakfast sandwiches didn't exist in 2018 and we wanted to engineer one from the ground up, we would not look toward chickens for the eggs. We wouldn't look toward pigs for the sausage. In the same way that if, say, the idea of watching movies at home to us was somehow brand new to us in 2018, you know what we wouldn't do? We wouldn't go out and build physical video rental stores to have to get up and drive to on a Friday night. We use science and technology to cut out middlemen all the time to bring better products to us. And the same is happening with food. Rather than growing all those crops and funneling them through animals and raising the animals, transporting them, slaughtering them, we just use the protein that's already found in plants. And food companies are doing this. They're making chicken without the chickens. They're making plant-based burgers that have more protein than beef. They're making pork without the pig and even cheese from nuts instead of cows. These products are way more resource efficient to produce because they use less land and water and other inputs. They're also better for us. They've got less saturated fat, less fat, zero cholesterol because cholesterol only comes from animal proteins. But what if we want real meat? I'm not talking about meat made from plants. I'm talking about actual flesh and muscle and tissue without animals. It's impossible, right? When 1931, Winston Churchill was asked to predict what the world would look like in a half a century, and you know what he said? He predicted that in 50 years, we shall escape the absurdity of growing a whole chicken in order to eat the breast or the wing by growing those parts separately under a suitable medium. Total science fiction for Winston Churchill back in 31, but today it's becoming our science fact. It's called clean meat, and like clean energy, it's way more resource efficient to produce. We can now take a biopsy the size of a poppy seed from a single chicken feather, just the feather, and grow enough nuggets to feed an army or a village, all from that biopsy. These innovations are shifting our relationship with food at the cellular level. And because what we eat is really an extension of what it is to be human, I believe that fundamentally changing our relationship with food in this way can serve to elevate our own humanity. I think it can lead to a kinder, more compassionate, more empathetic world for everybody. Here's how. We humans, we are an amazing species. We're capable of such wonderful things. We've got a spark of imagination and creativity that's unparalleled in the rest of the animal kingdom. We're the only species on the planet that can see the stars, dream about what might be up there, and then actually go and find out. At the same time, we also share so much in common with other species. Joy, play, communication. These aren't just middlemen. Do you know that chickens communicate with one another using complex vocalizations, just like we do? They have different cries to alert one another when a predator is approaching by land versus by air. Fish can learn and use tools. Pigs rank higher on intelligence tests than 3-year-old humans do. And of course, we all want to avoid pain. We want to avoid suffering. We all want to avoid fear. If through our diets we can learn to focus on all the ways in which we're so similar with other species, rather than just focusing on that narrative of the other, all of those ways in which we're different, I believe it would bring tremendous value to how we treat one another. So a fish was born with gills instead of lungs. So a chicken was born with wings instead of arms. If we can extend our circle of compassion, our circle of empathy, to those beings most unlike ourselves, how might we extend it to our fellow humans? To those born black instead of white, or gay instead of straight, to those born in another country than we are. My road to picturing this world started many years ago. When I was about 12, my sister came home from school one day, a vegetarian. It was in the early 90s, if you couldn't guess by the clothes here. I'd never even heard the word vegetarian, let alone met one before. And so like any good little brother would do, I made fun of her. Imagine with that hair, I was the one making fun of her. I'd put my steak on the end of my fork and stick it in her face and make a mooing sound. My mom, fortunately, she was much more accommodating. If she had a pot of beef chili on the stove, she'd have a pot of bean chili next to it for my sister. If she was grilling hamburgers out there for us, she'd have a veggie burger out there as well. I started to try some of these weird new foods, and I actually liked them. But, I was no vegetarian. I made a point of that. If I had a black bean burger for lunch, I'd put bacon on it. If I had a bean burrito one day, I'd make sure I had chicken the next day. Eventually, I started to try some of these weird new foods, and I actually liked them. I too moved in that direction as I learned more and more about the reasons for my sister's new diet. And that brings me back to our breakfast sandwich. So I've got to confess, if you haven't guessed by now, though I'm sure you all have, it isn't made with cheese and sausage and eggs. The cheese is made from almonds. The sausage is pea protein. The eggs, that's chickpea flour. The entire thing is made from plants without animals, and it's delicious. So that world in which we're kinder and more compassionate, we're more empathetic toward one another, the world with a more stable climate where we're healthier, that's a better world for everybody. And I know we all have it within us to serve as ambassadors for that world every time we sit down to eat. serving as a good example for our friends and neighbors at school, at church, for little brothers and little sisters. And millions of people are doing it. All across the country, we're trying meatless Mondays. We're eating smaller portions of meat. We're moving meat from the center of the plate to the side of the plate. We're trying 1 or 2 veggie meals a day. Saving the world can be as simple as that and begins with every bite. Thank you.